The Hard Truth, Season 10, with Akosia Konedu, only on Viasat 1.
Brought to you by EcoBank.
Terrorist activities have always seemed like a faraway phenomenon reserved for the Middle East and Asia, but suddenly it is right on our doorsteps. For years, we have watched the atrocities committed by Boko Haram in northern Nigeria, destroying entire community and killing indiscriminately, all in the name of an Islamic State. Shabaab has also been engaging in indiscriminate killing, most recently the mass slaughter of over 126 students in Garissa. Recently, however, there's been a terrorist attack at a hotel in Burkina Faso, and now a most recent one in Côte d'Ivoire. Is the threat becoming uncomfortably close, and do we have the relevant intelligence apparatus to avert any threat of terrorism? Tonight on The Hard Truth, we talk in depth about the threat of terrorism in Africa and Ghana's preparedness to avert any possible attack. Our guest tonight is Irbard Ibrahim, an international relations and security expert, and my name is Nana Akosia Konedu, and this is The Hard Truth. We are proudly brought to you by EcoBank, the Pan-African Bank. Tonight on The Hard Truth, we are talking international security. And good news, we have security expert here, Irbard Ibrahim, international relations and security expert. Welcome to The Hard Truth.
Thank you so much.
How are you?
I'm doing great, Akosia.
Yeah, I'm sure people are wondering why he's in gloves, but he's in gloves because he has some medical conditions, so please don't judge. Now, let's go straight to the interview. The term terrorism seems not to have a specific definition, as many countries have defined it as applicable to their specific situation, and there is no specific definition for this. Now, so in the broader sense, how would you define terrorism, recounting historic antecedents?
I think the definition is quite subjective. What the world knows today is more about religious fundamentalism, religious zealotry, pushing people to take up arms against the state in a bid to tinker with the status quo. But the UN defines terrorism as any activity of violence by a non-state actor with the intention of causing mass casualties to make a political statement. So you know of the Lockerbie bombing, you know of the September 11 attacks, you've heard of the London train bombing, you've heard of the Madrid bombings as well. So since 9/11, it has gained a lot of traction and currency around the world. So today, terrorism is germane to the international security architecture. First, it was global warming, and the international community went to Copenhagen. We're seriously discussing how we can get China to cut down on the greenhouse emissions. But today is all about terrorism.
Terrorism activities in Africa were quite sparse, coming from the 20th to 21st century, with groups like Mau Mau in Kenya, with Nkumtu Sujwe in South Africa, and groups like that, fighting for their countries. Now, coming down to the 21st century, I want to ask, Shabaab, have gained prominence for terrorism activities. Why has this developed, in these areas?
There was an interface between the era you mentioned, post-independence, and the end of the Cold War. The US and the Soviet Union decided to cherry-pick what rebellions and mutinies around the world to support, including in Africa. So the term freedom fighter was used for certain people like John Garang and Mandela, as well as a host of others. So when did the freedom fighter, asking for a much more equitable cake regarding their own gas resources, petroleum resources, when did they transmogrify into terrorists? So therefore, Al-Shabaab is feeding into this lacuna in the definition of who a terrorist is. So now you don't have a terrorist in the true sense of the word. The person says they are fighting because Westerners have exploited Africa. And that, narrative seems to have sat well with the Somali people. That is why since the toppling of Siad Barre in 1991, you've heard of the issue of the Black Hawk Down. The world has not been able to make Somalia a bastion of stability. So domino effects. Algeria went to the polls in the 90s. Islamists won. They were not given the opportunity to rule. They are those who carried out the attack in Ivory Coast yesterday.
I'm looking at the developing trends in the areas that I mentioned. Why is that? Why is that is the question.
We aren't getting something right. You can't only be tackling terrorist infrastructure without tackling terrorist ideology. And an ideology does not efface with the killing of a terrorist leader. Everybody thought with the killing of Bin Laden, Al-Qaeda would be a thing of the past. Many, Al-Shabaab leaders have been killed through drone attacks, but they keep, replenishing their dissipated ranks.
There's a reason why. I thought exactly the point you just said. I thought Bin Laden going would have, made issues slide. But you realize leaders, come up after their leaders are killed, and now it's like a revolving, or it's a circle. It doesn't end.
Yeah,
why?
It's a vicious cycle of violence.
Is there like a motive behind the attacks, or wanting to bomb someone else?
Sometimes we are coy about attributing religion to the acts of terrorism, but they say religion is the opium of the masses. Wherever you've had a population of Muslims making up more than 50%, wherever, whether in Central Africa, East Africa, North Africa, or West Africa, you've always had a tinge of insurgency. So the moral high ground I'm talking about is when French forces go abroad, they should look better than ISIS and Al-Shabaab. When Americans go abroad to fight for peace and stability, they should look better than these guys. Yeah. But today, human lives have become video games. Unmanned drones are being used. People are sitting in some corner, and then they are killing people at will. And the UNHCR is not saying anything about it. The UN Security Council is not saying anything about it. Look at the violent torpedoing of the Gaddafi regime. Look at how Saddam Hussein was toppled based upon false intelligence that he had weapons of mass destruction. So all these acts of international injustice provide fodder for the recruitment of young, impressionable people across the world, including in Africa.
All right, let's talk about the term Islamists and jihadists. Now, they've become popularly associated with terrorists in recent acts, linking with Al-Qaeda and Al-Matoyum, in some other places.
Yes,
So now you realize again that Boko Haram have been pursuing an Islamic state in Nigeria, and Al-Shabaab has also been fighting jihad.
Exactly.
I want to ask you, let's look at the misconception to believe that terrorism is being provided by Islamic extremists, and is there a basis for their actions?
I don't think there is any justification from the Quran or the Bible to legitimize the wanton disregard for human life we are seeing in the case of Boko Haram or in the case of Joseph Kony of the Lost Resistance Army in Uganda. I'll quote for you a portion of the Quran that says, من أجل ذلك كتبنا على بني إسرائيل أنه من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا. Thus did we decree unto the children of Israel and all the nations that would come after them, that anybody who deliberately took away the soul of an innocent person, it would be as though the person has exterminated the whole of humanity. And in the same vein, anybody who saved a single soul would have the magnitude of a reward commensurate with saving the whole of humanity. So a religion that calls for salvation cannot call for murder in equal measure. So there is no Quranic basis, there is no biblical basis to such activities. But if you ask of, Islamism and jihadism, they are pretty much like the UGCC and the CPP. When the UGCC came, and it was a zeitgeist, they said independence in the shortest possible time. A radical Nkrumah came home and said independence now. Islamists are just like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And Nana Kosia, why would the Egyptian people democratically elect Mohamed Morsi as president? Then he is toppled in a coup. Then the international community that says it is spreading democracy around the world is eerily silent. So Islamists are now turning into jihadists because Islamists believe they can be part of the political system and effect the needed change. There are times they've done 5 decades before wielding power. But the jihadists believe democracy is not the way to go, and the United Nations has not been fair to the Middle East and the larger Muslim world, including North Africa, and therefore they don't respect whatever resolutions that are passed on the floor of the UN. And this injustice is felt by everybody. Akosia, why should an ICC in The Hague be trying only leaders from the third world, leaders from Africa and Eastern Europe, when in fact the hands of people like Bush and Tony Blair are sullied with the blood of, if not hundreds of thousands, millions of people that have been killed? Why should there be a world of 195 or so countries and the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council? 2 of them are from Europe, as tiny a continent as it is. 1 is from the Americas and 2 are from the Far East. Where is Africa's representation with 54 nations?
So we are not prioritizing it.
Exactly. So I think for as long as the world is yearning and clamoring for justice, for peace, I think there needs to be justice and equity.
We'll be right back.
The Hard Truth, Season 10, with Akosia Konedu, only on Viasat 1.
Brought to you by EcoBank. At EcoBank, we see a great future. One that's full of opportunity for those who want to be the best. With over 1,000 branches of a single bank across 33 African countries. It's a future where trade can flourish without boundaries. The future is breathtaking, with enormous cross-border investments helping business and government build new infrastructure, while individuals achieve their ambitions right across Africa. The future is Pan-African, and EcoBank is the Pan-African bank.
Welcome back to The Hard Truth, and we are proudly brought to you by EcoBank, the Pan-African Bank, International Relations and Security Expert, Irbard, I got it right,
Yeah,
Ibrahim. It's still here.
You're dead.
Let's talk about, let's look at this. You know, since the Islamic States, entry into Libya, Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb has responded with series of attacks to bolster its claims of primary in the Western Sahara. Some experts are of the opinion that aside from the message being sent to France and its allies via attacks, the message is also being sent to ISIS and, competing the Islamic factions. I want to ask you, what do you think of this assessment?
I think Al-Qaeda acted as the midwife that oversaw the birth of ISIS. In fact, ISIS was nothing but a franchise of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So when the Arab Spring started, Abu Bakr Baghdadi, who is the leader of ISIS, saw an opportunity. So he deployed soldiers and funneled some funds for them to open a front in Syria. Initially, they wanted to hide their identity. They were camouflaged in the Nusra Front. That became so popular in the Syrian rebellion. Then later they came out and said they were ISIS. People have called them ISIL sometimes, Islamic State in Iraq, and the Levant. The Levant goes beyond Syria. It covers parts of Lebanon and Jordan. So when the Obama administration says it wants to call them ISIL, that is why there's a disparity in that nomenclature. So whether ISIL or ISIS, one and the same thing. They are brands. The more brutal you are, the more headlines you make around the world. So ISIS beheads, AQIM attacks civilians in hotels. So therefore there's a turf war between those two because ISIS broke away from the parent group Al-Qaeda. And mind you, Akosia, this resurgence of AQIM comes as no surprise to me. The world channeled all of its arsenal against ISIS. All the nations of the world were devoting their military materiel to fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. So in the interim, that gave the opportunity to AQIM, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and the treasure trove of classified information points to the fact that Ghana is more threatened by the Yemeni branch of Al-Qaeda, AQAP, than we are threatened by AQIM. So Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula was the same group that deployed that Nigerian young man, Omar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, meant for Detroit, but passing through Accra. And our national security have apprehended people who have forged, Ghanaian passports coming from Yemen. So for me, even though the attacks in Francophone West Africa, Mali, Burkina Faso, and recently Ivory Coast should give us cause for concern and apprehension as a nation, I think the threat would rather come from further afield, from AQAP rather than AQIM.
Let's look at messages, some of the leaders of Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb. It also indicates that the groups are targeting countries in the regions where they have affiliates to France and all these people, the troops they sent, to France with the UN forces. Divergent views exist on potentials for attacks on countries, which contribute to troops in fighting that. Do you see Ghana as a risk, a target terrorist risk?
I don't think so. In the interim, no. AQM is cherry-picking French allies in the region. Most people do not know that France has become much more belligerent and bellicose in its foreign policy posture.
I remember we sent some troops to Mali and Ghana.
We are serving with MINUSMA. MINUSMA is a UN-sanctioned peacekeeping force. But France is interested in the gas in Niger and other resources within the Sahel. And so currently Operation Barkhane is ongoing, and France has deployed thousands of soldiers to fight against AQIM, Al-Morabiton, just as you indicated, Ansar Din, as well as a host of others, including Tuareg rebels in the Azawad, the three northern cities of Mali, Kidal, Timbuktu, and Gao. So France has become like the warhead that is leading the charge against such transnational militant organizations. So naturally, there's going to be a ricochet effect. So Mali, then Burkina, Ivory Coast, I suspect the next target to be a 4-star or 5-star hotel, if not in Togo, then in Senegal or Guinea. It will be very difficult because, number one, we are an Anglophone country. We aren't contributing militarily to fight the fight against AQIM.
So
no cause for alarm, but we need to take the needed precautions.
I want to ask you, is Ghana ready with its intelligence? Are we capable of readiness to some of these attacks?
The examples we saw, mass casualty events in Accra, the Menai disaster, the June 3 floods, indicates we don't have the preparedness to cope with the deaths of a dozen or two people in Accra. So I don't think we have the needed.
What do we attribute that to? Is it less military men, or we don't have the intelligence?
We are spending a chunk of the country's resources and winning the next election. Every president, responsible president in the world will tell you their number one priority is to keep their people safe. Who would want to buy the needed surveillance and reconnaissance equipment? Who would want to buy drones to surveil our borders so that they lose in November? They would want to pump the money into campaigns. So therefore, we've got misplaced priorities. How can there be a city like Accra and our streets, boulevards we have in Accra, and there are no security cameras? So national security,
so we are not ready.
We've never been ready. And I don't think we'll ever be ready. The tactics that are adopted defy the convention of warfare.
So God forbid, I don't know what I should ask, but let me ask you. So in case the unfortunate happens and there is an attack in Ghana, what happens?
If there is an attack, I expect the attack to take place at places we least expect. Shopping malls, yeah. A lot of people are talking about them. Hotels, fine. But you go to the New Plant station, you pick a bus from Accra to Kumasi. In the dead of the night, someone hops onto the bus out of nowhere and says they are selling an aphrodisiac or they want to pray. There could be a suicide bomber, whether a woman or a man. And you can imagine the casualty figures we would have. So they are no longer attacking hard targets. Terrorism is an evolving threat. As and when you have the needed wherewithal, you would want to attack the Burma camp. You know, when military bases were attacked elsewhere, we beefed up security at the Burma camp. But the attack here, then when you are not concentrating on soft targets, then they attack elsewhere. So I think the strength they have is that they are always a step ahead of conventional warfare and all the ethos of the execution of war.
So the public must be vigilant.
I want to see our security agencies simulate an attack on Accra Mall and how the citizens should react. So that, yes, government is doing a lot. In our own small way, we contribute to the efforts to keep Ghana safe. I know there's an anti-terrorism unit that meets every Monday to assess and reassess the threat levels. And yesterday's meeting by the National Security Council has given us a certain alertness that Ghana stands vulnerable to be targeted. So we need to begin to psych the minds of the Ghanaian people that it could happen, and as and when it does, how do you react?
We'll be right back.
The Hard Truth, Season 10, with Akosia Konedu, only on Vice at 1.
Brought to you by EcoBank. At EcoBank, we see a great future. One that's full of opportunity for those who want to be the best. With over 1,000 branches of a single bank across 33 African countries. It's a future where trade can flourish without boundaries. The future is breathtaking, with enormous cross-border investments helping business and government build new infrastructure, while individuals achieve their ambitions right across Africa. The future is Pan-African, and EcoBank is the Pan-African bank.
Welcome back to The Hard Truth, and we are proudly brought to you by EcoBank, the Pan-African Bank. Irbard, let me ask you. Now, since you are an expert, so I am working, at the mall, and I see this weird person with a backpack, and he's just looking around. What should we look out for? Some of the basics to look out for.
If people are living in the fantasy world that they will see a person in jalabia with a thick beard coming to announce his presence that I'm going to attack, then they should forget it. There are templates for us to work with. In the case of West Hills now, the Westgate attack in Nairobi, they actually rented an office space within the mall. So people keep asking, and this is a question we've asked in interactions with security couples. There are certain jewelry shops at Accra Mall and certain high-stake, businesses there where nobody actually enters to buy anything, but they are still operational. Are they a front for any such organizations? Because we know terrorist organizations would want to circumvent the banking system. So if there is a sheikh in the Gulf that wants to throw maybe $100 million to Boko Haram or AQIM, they don't wire the money through the conventional banking system. They buy legitimate merchandise. Those subtleties we easily overlook turned out to be the recruitment bonanza and the bargaining chips such terrorist organizations use.
Let me talk about the borders. We've seen a weak link, in fight against terrorism at our borders. Now, due to this porous nature, what can government do realistically to avert the situation? We look at illegal smuggling routes and all. What can be done here?
During the last quarter of 2015, we made some of the unprecedented discoveries of caches of weapons. A small country like ours has got 42 entry points. Terrestrially alone, not to talk about maritime entry points and aerial entry points. So it becomes very difficult. And I've been in programs with the spokesperson of the Ghana Immigration Service. They say it's too difficult to man all of these approved and unapproved routes. So I believe the only way we can insulate Ghana is by working on the human resource of the nation. Abashed as a young man that we live in a desperate system where there is an association for unemployed graduates. youth unemployment, marginalization. These are the areas of potential recruitment for our young people. I don't anticipate someone coming from across the borders into Ghana. For me, the ticking time bomb for us is the masses of young people that are so despondent. They have no hope for the future. And you have a government that says it has closed down or placed an embargo on employment in the past 2 or 3 years. And so that is enough security challenge for us as a sovereign nation. So if we mainstream terrorism, educate people about it right from the elementary level, tell them it's bad, it doesn't help anybody's cause, and it will be difficult for you to get people to use as cannon fodder. AQIM, AQAP, ISIS could all be rendered redundant if the world carried out the battle for hearts and minds. Will be the surest way to have a durable panacea to the issue of terrorism. It doesn't matter how much you spend.
I'm really sure. So I'm scared. I don't know whether I'm scared. I have a funny feeling now. People at home will be scared. What can you tell all of us? So we should be vigilant. What is it? What can we do, all of us, to collectively to ensure safety in our nation?
I have confidence in our security agencies. I keep saying we have a diligent police force and a robust army on standby to protect us in case things go amiss. But if protecting a country from terrorist activities is about intelligence sharing, the use of state-of-the-art security gadgets, ISIS wouldn't have been able to penetrate Paris on the 13th of November to kill more than 130 people. So it goes beyond that. There is more to the activities of terrorists than meets the eye. So therefore, as individuals, don't be that, hospitable Ghanaian that sees something suspicious and keeps mum about it. When you see something, say something. We live in a city where people come from other West African countries. They rent out from landlords and landladies. For as long as they have words of currency in a brown envelope, nobody questions their background. People have rented spaces to people. These are young, exuberant men driving in Porsche cars. They sleep throughout the day, and you don't question them what they do for a living. So therefore, I believe these are some of the areas I think Ghanaians should be quite concerned with. Let's create awareness. Terrorists are out there to send us a very strong political statement. And whatever loophole there is, we need to plug. As a nation, we should leave no stone unturned in doing that. And our number one priority as a nation is how to keep the Ghanaian people safe. So no military or defense budget is too huge. Spend more on our security, keep us safe, and I believe anybody who doesn't assure us of our security will most likely suffer in November because this is a threat that is facing all countries within the sub-region. And Nigeria has suffered from Boko Haram, La Côte d'Ivoire has suffered, other nations have suffered, so we need assurances that Ghana will not suffer a terrorist attack in the near future.
Irbard Ibrahim, thank you so much for
It's a pleasure.
I am praying that nothing happens to you by shaking hands.
No, nothing. Nothing. I want to shake some more. Maybe this will be therapy for me. Thank you so much for having me.
International Relations and Security Expert, and you've been watching The Hard Truth, and we are proudly brought to you by EcoBank, the Pan-African Bank. I am Akusia Konedu. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.
The Hard Truth, Season 10, with Akusia Konedu, only on Vice at 1.
Brought to you by EcoBank.